We are the nerds you're looking for. Take it easy, guys.
Wakanda forever.
You're real dumb. Like, you're a dumb person. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. My name, of course, is Patrick Kuhn, alongside my co-host, as always, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing pretty well, man. How are you?
Very sleepy. Just rolled out of bed, got breakfast, and now we're recording. So,
did you? I know that it's been pretty consistent the last few Sunday mornings we've recorded that you stay up pretty late playing video games. Was that the case last night?
No. We actually, my wife and I just hung out and binge watched some shows that I'm actually going to talk about for what I'm into.
Oh, cool.
And then I just fell asleep on the couch, and I woke up this morning and I was still asleep on the couch. My wife didn't even bother to try to wake me up. I fall asleep on the couch a lot. And so I'm just still wearing the clothes that I fell asleep in. So it's already off to a good start this morning.
I've had a tough week as far as it goes with like hanging out with my wife because she is big into the Olympics. I'm not so much. Like some of the events are pretty cool to watch, but like she watches it every night. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to fuck off upstairs then. And, I do something else. So that's kind of what she did the first half of the night last night. So I was like upstairs, not really doing much of anything because she had the main TV in the living room. So I read some comic books and stuff. But then later on, I went down there and we watched one of Dave Chappelle's newer stand-up comedies. So I'm not going to talk about it for what I'm into. So I figured I'd bring it up here. But it was pretty good. It was pretty hilarious. So I'm eager to watch the second one. He makes it sound like in the special that he's pretty much going to go back to not doing much after this Netflix contract was up. So I don't know when the next time we see comedy from him is going to be.
Yeah, I've heard some really good stuff about it. I've seen the first one, and I guess he released 2 more? Or is it just 1 more? So I can't remember.
Like he released 1, and you click on it, and there's 2 specials under it. And then he just released another, and when you click on it, there's 2 specials on it. So altogether,
there's 4 in total.
Yeah.
My math is on point right now. No, I've actually been kind of disappointed with the Olympics this year. I usually, this time around, I guess, I am a big Winter Olympics guy. Like I like the Olympics in general, but I'm definitely a bigger fan of the Winter Olympics than the summer. And I know I'm probably in the minority there. And I think we've talked about this on an earlier episode of the podcast. I think when we first started was the last Winter Olympics when we first started the podcast. So I think we talked about that a little bit. I think it has a lot to do with the coverage because there's a lot of events in the Winter Olympics that I don't give 2 shits about. Yeah. And it seems like they sprinkle those in. Like the figure skating, I'm just not interested in it at all. And it seems like that's a big deal in the Winter Olympics, and I just don't care about it. So it's like a lot of this primetime coverage is what I've been watching, and it's like, oh, they'll go like 30 minutes on figure skating, and then they'll sprinkle in the thing that I wanted to watch for like 2 minutes, and then they'll go back to figure skating. And I've just been really disappointed with the coverage this year because I want to see the other stuff. I want to see the hockey. I want to see the speed skating. I want to see the cross country skiing, which is one that isn't very popular, but I love. And I just haven't been seeing much of that this year. It's all been fucking figure skating.
My wife loves figure skating, so that works for her. But I just saw something around like the hockey portion of it. And I know that we typically don't get into sports too much on the podcast, but maybe you can explain this to me. So the NHL didn't let any of their players participate. Is that right?
Yeah. So normally what happens with the Olympics, with at least the Winter Olympics, is when it comes up during the NHL season, because the NHL season is going on currently, they take like a 3-week break. and they let their athletes go to the Olympics and compete. And this was actually the first year in a long time that they haven't. And I'm not quite sure, because I don't follow hockey as much as I used to. I'm not quite sure why they made that choice, but I do remember, like, this is the first year since I think if you ever saw the movie Miracle, when we beat the Russians, I think that was one of the last years, or maybe it was the last year, that we didn't send NHL players to the Olympics. And so we've been doing it for decades now, and this is the first Olympics in a long time. Pretty much since then, they haven't sent anybody over there, which is strange. Like I said, I haven't been following the NHL like I have in the past, so I'm not quite sure the rationale behind that. But other sports leagues do that as well. Like baseball doesn't let the major leaguers go as well. So it's kind of a shit show when it comes to that. And I haven't been as interested in the hockey, and I don't think there's been as much coverage of the hockey with the Winter Olympics because of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd be curious to. I've not kept up with it at all, so I'm curious like who's done well this year at the Olympics with that fact in mind.
Yeah, I mean, the Russians always usually do pretty well. NHL players are not. We usually typically do fairly well. The Canadians, that's another big one as well.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so, I haven't watched as much Winter Olympics as I usually do, but I've been kind of caught up in some of the Netflix shows that I'm going to talk about. So you just want to jump right into what we're into?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
All right, so what'd you watch this week?
How do you know it's something I watch, Pat?
It's almost always a movie or a TV show, let's be honest.
No, actually, I read some books this week.
Oh, yeah?
I know, I'm just kidding. That's not true. Although I am reading Ready Player One. But besides the point, that's not what I'm into. You were correct. I did watch something this week. And what I watched was Crashing, which is a show on HBO that is basically a fictionalized version of the comedy scene in New York City. It's created by Pete Holmes, who also stars in the show as a fictional version of himself. So in the first episode, you see Pete. He's married, but he finds out in that first episode that his wife is cheating on him, which obviously results in them splitting up. And the show kind of follows his adventure from there. So the issue that Pete runs into is that his wife had been financially supporting him while he chased his comedy dream. And now that they're split up, he's basically homeless with no money and still trying to be a comedian, which doesn't really pay a lot at the level he's at, like at all. So, he's barking on the street corner for time, which is basically handing out flyers. And if he gets 5 people to a show, he gets to go up on stage. So, he's working for stage time, not for money, and kind of follows his adventure in that vein. So through his time away from his wife, he meets a lot of comedians along the way. He meets Artie Lang, TJ Miller, and then in the second season, which is going on right now, he meets Bill Burr. And these guys give him temporary places to stay, as well as advice for an up-and-coming comedian. And the thing that is kind of charming about this show is that Pete is overall a pretty lovable guy. He just doesn't get it sometimes. Similar to apparently Pete Holmes in real life, the character Pete was going to be a pastor and all of that kind of stuff before he became a comedian, and his naive nature is a big part of the show. Overall, it's been really funny, and like I said, Pete's an easy character to root for. The only problem I have is that he is constantly making bad decisions, mostly because he's ignorant to the real world and the comedy scene and that type of stuff. So sometimes these plot twists where he messes up are cringeworthy, and I find myself watching the show saying, "No, Pete, please don't," and then something happens that is terrible. And that aside, it is a really, really easy watch. It's the first season's 8 episodes and they're 30 minutes apiece, so super quick watch. And season 2 is going on right now, so I think the new episodes come out on Sundays. I don't know that I'm a huge Pete Holmes comedy fan. I don't know that I like his stand-up that much, but this show is pretty good. Like, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, I actually think that I kind of railed on Pete Holmes in a really, really early episode. So don't go back and listen to that, because I think it's one of the dark periods of this podcast where we were still pretty awkward. Well, I think it was when the Pete Holmes show started on TBS. I kind of talked about how I wasn't really a big fan of Pete Holmes, and I've kind of grown to appreciate his comedy a little bit more. Like, he actually talks about it in his most recent special, Faces and Sounds, I think is what it's called, where basically he kind of makes fun of the people that are what he calls like a tough laugh. And he's talking about how everybody kind of makes fun of him for being an easy laugh, and his comedy's kind of easy to go down, I guess. And he's like, yeah, I love life. Like, why are you such an asshole? I don't remember exactly. I'm kind of butchering the bit, but yeah, it was just, he kind of explains it, and it kind of opened my eyes to how I can be sometimes about stuff like that. And so I've kind of learned to respect his comedy a little bit more after I've seen that special. I've actually seen it a couple of times. So this is a show that I started watching with my wife when it first came out. I think a couple of years ago, the first season came out, and I really fell in love with it, but she didn't really like it. And so it kind of fell by the wayside, and I don't think I even finished the first season, but I really enjoyed it. I mean, we talk about this occasionally. I haven't done a show in a while, but I have a couple coming up that I'm really excited about. I dabble in stand-up, so I kind of appreciate some of the aspects. I know that you kind of talked about him trying to make money in comedy, and it's really hard. I mean, I'm sure it's a little bit tougher in New York City than it is where I'm at, but like I've literally had shows where I'll get paid $50 to host a show, but I had to spend 2 hours to drive to that show. So gas is like $20. I probably $10-20 I spent to drive to the show, and they don't count my food. So it's like I eat dinner before the show, and there's my $50 right there. So it's like I can empathize with that situation a lot. But yeah, this is a show that I definitely need to revisit, because I didn't enjoy it quite a lot.
Yeah, man, I was surprised whenever you told me the other day that you don't think you finished the first season, because this seems like a show to me that's right up your alley with the stand-up comedy aspect of it. So yeah, if I were you, I'd definitely revisit it and give it another go. But that aside, what are you into, man?
Well, I'm going to talk about two Netflix shows. The first one, Everything Sucks. I don't really have a ton to say about. I just binge watched, I think, the first like 6 or 7 episodes last night. It's a pretty easy watch. It's only 10 episodes, and they're all about, I think, less than like 25 minutes long. So they go down pretty easy. Unfortunately, for me anyways, I'm not going to say that the show itself is bad, because I don't think it's bad for what it's trying to do. I just misinterpreted what I thought. Like, my expectations going in were that I talked about Big Mouth, which is a Netflix animated comedy that came out a while back, and I really liked that show quite a lot. And I thought that this show, Everything Sucks, was going to be kind of a live action version of that show, kind of talking about kids growing up and going through puberty, but it was also set in the 90s, and that's kind of my heyday, so I was pretty excited about that. But it's not necessarily a comedy. Like, it's not trying to be a comedy. It kind of felt like, I don't know if you've ever seen This Is Us. I've seen a couple episodes because my wife used to be a fan of that show, where it's just like melodrama overload, and I think that that's kind of what this show is sometimes. And they definitely touch on some really important, they're trying to bring some people into the forefront that I don't think get as much attention. And I'm trying to be vague, not to spoil anything for anybody, but it just wasn't what I wanted the show to be. And I'm just not going to stick with it. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad, but I just think that if you're going into it like I was going into it, thinking that it's going to be a comedy, then I would definitely just skip it, because it's not that. It does have some funny moments, but I think at times it tries way too hard to be funny, which is weird because it's definitely more of a drama than anything else. But there are a few moments where it's really, really funny. There's a part where these kids recreate an Oasis, the Wonderwall music video. and it's really, really funny. But other than that, I don't think I laughed hardly at all during the show. So it's definitely not a comedy. So if that's what you expect, I would definitely say skip. Everything sucks. But if you're into those type of like melodramas and you want a little 90s nostalgia, I definitely say check it out. The second show that I wanted to talk about is Altered Carbon, which is the show of the two that I liked the most. And this show is pretty complicated as far as the concept. I was trying to think how to summarize this show in like a couple of sentences. And honestly, you really can't because it's pretty complicated. The show is based on a series of books, which of course I have not read because I don't read that much if it's not a comic book. But basically, the show happens in the faraway future. And essentially, people are somewhat immortal. They have invented these things that they call stacks, which kind of look like those little like plastic pizza shooters that you would get in like old TMNT action figures. And so they're just like these little circle things, and they basically implant them in the back of your head, like by your brainstem. And it's basically just your soul, essentially. And they call your body your sleeve, and your sleeve can die, but as long as your stack stays intact, they can transfer it to another sleeve, so another body. Unfortunately, if you do this a lot, if you jump from sleeve to sleeve, essentially you go crazy. Well, the super rich in this world called meths, which I'm sure that they explained why they called meths, but I must have missed it. And I live in southern Indiana, so meth means a whole different thing. You don't necessarily think of the super rich when you think of meth in Evansville, Indiana. But yeah, they're called the meths, and basically they've kind of figured out a way around that, which is if you're super rich, you can basically pay companies to exactly clone you, and you don't go crazy if you keep jumping from clone to clone. And so that basically creates the super rich can basically be immortal because they could just jump from clone to clone and they can live forever. And some of the just uber rich actually have military satellites where they can upload, kind of like the iCloud, where they can kind of upload their stack to that every 48 hours. So even if their stack gets destroyed, they can just upload it to another stack. And so it's super complicated. And if you think to yourself, wow, I don't know if I'm going to remember all that, don't worry. They fucking remind you every like 30 seconds of the show. Like especially the first couple episodes, they say stack and sleeve like every 20 seconds. It's actually kind of annoying, but the show itself is really cool. Once it gets going, I would definitely say give it a couple episodes if you're gonna give it a shot, because it definitely needs a couple episodes to get going. But once it gets going, it's really, really cool. It basically looks like Blade Runner 2049, like the style of it looks really, really cool. And honestly, and I know a lot of people are comparing it to Blade Runner, so I know this is going to sound pretty familiar to what everybody else is saying, but this is kind of what I wanted the original Blade Runner to be. Tyler and I have talked a lot, especially when we reviewed the new Blade Runner, that we were both kind of not necessarily, well, I guess disappointed. I was definitely disappointed in the Blade Runner, the original movie, just because it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be Altered Carbon, which is really, really cool. And I definitely, if you're a big sci-fi nerd, I would definitely give this show a shot, because I don't think that you'll be disappointed.
Yeah, I've had numerous buddies of mine text me and ask me if I'm watching this. So, I mean, I definitely need to, I think, especially judging by what you just said. So maybe that'll be the next show I watch, since I'm caught up on Crashing now. But I heard that like the first 6 episodes were pretty boring. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't necessarily say that they're boring, but like I said, the concept itself is pretty complicated, so it does take a little bit to kind of get going. I wouldn't necessarily say it takes 6 episodes, but it does take a little bit to get going. I will say that there is a particular episode that kind of felt like the 11 episode from Stranger Things season 2.
Yeah.
It's not quite as bad as that episode, because I really, really hate that episode. Like, I've rewatched that season of television quite a lot, and I just, at this point, just skip that episode because I'm not interested in it at all. But it kind of gives you background information on the main character, and kind of how he became who he is right now.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it's necessarily as boring as that 11 episode, but it does kind of feel like you're watching almost a different show. So I will say that was kind of disappointing, but for the most part, the show, like you said, does take a little bit to get going, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it takes 6 episodes.
Gotcha.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tal and I read a ton of comics. It sounds like he read quite a lot this week, kind of hanging out by himself. But what'd you read this week?
So there were a few things that came out this week that I was pretty excited about, but the one that piqued my interest the most is what I'm going to talk about today, and that's Kick-Ass #1. I guess you would call it Kick-Ass Volume 2 #1 because this is, of course, a renumbering of the Kick-Ass franchise with a new character. And I never read the initial runs of Kick-Ass or Hit Girl. I am just familiar with Kick-Ass through the movies, which were movies that I liked. I mean, the first one I liked a lot more than the second one. But, since this was kind of a renumbering and a fresh start with the series, I thought that I'd pick this up. It's written by Mark Millar. And I say Millar, but I've heard other people say Miller. So I apologize if I'm saying it wrong, but I'm just going to go with Millar. And then it was drawn by John Romita Jr., who are the same guys that, of course, did the original run of Kick-Ass in 2008. And like I said, never read those, but I'm pretty sure they were fairly similar to the movies. A kid decides he wants to be a superhero, dresses up as a superhero, and then eventually legitimately starts fighting crime. And I will say that so far, this book is a lot different from that story. It follows Patience Lee, who is an African-American woman that is fighting for the army in Iraq. When she gets home from her tour of duty, she learns that her husband had left her a few days earlier, and her parents greet her at the airport with her kids. She had planned to go to engineering school while her husband worked once she got back from Iraq, but now with him pretty much bailing, she has to find a way to not only support her family, but she has to find a way to pay off like this terrible loan that her husband had taken out. It's like $10,000 with terrible interest rates. And so she kind of mulls her options, and at the end of the day, she decides that she's going to rob a local gangster. And when she's commit the robbery, she decides that she'll dress up like a superhero to do so that she's thought of by the gangsters as a nutcase comic book fan, and so that nothing leads back to her. So obviously the character that she picks to dress up as is Kick-Ass. And like I said, that's a lot different from the original. And of course, we're only in issue 1. But I think that that's a pretty good thing, though. I mean, what would be the point of rehashing this comic if it was just going to be a new kid in the same suit wanting to fight crime? I think that they'll eventually get there with Patience. She'll eventually start fighting crime and, kind of buy into the superhero thing. But for right now, I like that she's doing it for completely opposite reasons, and she just wants to support her family and support herself. Also, since she has that army background, it means that she doesn't suck at fighting. So that's a cool change too, where we don't have to watch the main character continually fail before learning how to do things like we did with the original Kick-Ass, where, he had no background in anything. So overall, this comic didn't knock me off my feet, but I'm definitely going to stick with it to see where it goes. I know that Hit Girl #1 comes out this Wednesday, so they're relaunching that too, and that I think Mark Millar is writing the first 6 issues, and then Kevin Smith is going to write the next arc after that. So, it's pretty cool that they're bringing these comics back. Hopefully, again, like I said, not a retread, and that they do some cool things with them. But so far, so good.
Yeah, it's funny because we were streaming last night and you were like, oh, well, I got dibs on this. And I was like, I didn't even know that this came out because I don't know. I think the movies, and I know that you're a bigger fan, obviously, than I am of them, but the movies didn't really capture my attention very much. I don't know. It just didn't seem that interesting to me. I generally do enjoy those types of stories, but for whatever reason, I just didn't like these movies that much, especially the jetpack scene kind of spoiled me a little bit, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I never really got into these movies, and I never read the comic books when they first came out. So since I wasn't a fan of the movies after they came out, I just really didn't care too much about the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, the second movie's pretty bad, but I
Yeah.
really do like that first one quite a bit. But anyways, what did you read this week?
So another Star Wars miniseries started, so I decided to pick it up, and it's Star Wars Thrawn, which I think is how you pronounce that character's name. Basically, he is a character that was introduced in a series of novels that people really, really love. But when Disney bought Lucasfilms, they basically said everything that has come before it that aren't the original films and a few other things aren't canon. So they basically made him not canon anymore. But then he appears in Star Wars Rebels, so I guess he's canon again. I don't know. It gets kind of complicated. But essentially, he's a character that's a big fan favorite that I haven't actually seen a ton of because I don't watch Star Wars Rebels, so I don't know a ton about him other than the fact that fans really, really enjoy him quite a lot. He's a fan favorite, like I said. So I was pretty excited about this particular book, and I'm not sure why I keep doing this to myself because I keep thinking that they're going to give us more than they eventually do, especially with DJ Most Wanted, which I talked about either last episode or maybe it was 2 episodes ago. Like, that book was really, really disappointing. And I wouldn't say that this book is necessarily quite that disappointing, but it starts off really, really well. You kind of get his experience and you kind of get to see him in action the first few pages, and then it kind of slows to a halt after that. I am really intrigued with the character though, because he does eventually get captured and you kind of get the sense that he's always one step ahead of everybody and that maybe he got captured on purpose, and then there's an overall plan that he's trying to get to, and I'm kind of intrigued to see what that is. But at the same time, the last, like, I would say 3/4 of the book didn't really give you much, so it's kind of tough to stick with a 6-part miniseries when the first part, basically the last like 15, 16 pages were kind of a disappointment. But I don't know. I probably get sucked into at least one more episode, or not one more episode, one more issue, because I'm a sucker when it comes to stuff with Star Wars. But yeah, it was kind of disappointing. I was expecting a lot from this miniseries, and it just didn't really give it to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame Marvel for what they're doing with the Star Wars franchise. I mean, obviously you have a moneymaker on your hand, and there are nerds out there that will buy everything put out that has the Star Wars name on it. So I get why they're doing all of these different series with different characters, but for me, I just don't have time to get sucked into all those, and I'm not interested in half of them anyways. So I think that for now, like, I'm sticking with Darth Vader and the main Star Wars comic, which I'm crazy behind on anyways. So I don't know. I've just not been interested in these side stories.
Yeah, for the most part, they've been pretty disappointing.
For sure, dude.
All right, so what's nerd news this week?
All right, so a few stories here. This first one, I fully imagine you did not watch the trailer for, but there was a new trailer released for Incredibles 2 during the Olympics this week, and it shows more so of what's actually going to happen in the movie as opposed to that first teaser that was more or less just Jack. What's the baby's name? Jack, kind of like the movie announcement trailer. So did you see it?
No, I did not.
So it does show more of the story, and we've said it a few times on the podcast. Like, you know, I would have preferred this movie to pick up like 14, 15 years later and to see how the families progress. But this trailer shows it basically picking up literally when the first one ends, with the minor character coming out from underground. It actually shows them fight him. And then it looks like the story is going to more so be like, I guess, a mirror image of the first one, where Elastigirl gets to go off and kind of do her thing, superhero wise, and Mr. Incredible basically stays home with the kids. There's a lot of stuff shown with him and Jack, and I'm sure hilarity and hijinks will ensue as well. But I don't know. I think it'd be pretty good. I hope it'd be pretty good. I think that this was one of my Rotten Tomato movies, so definitely looks like what we come to expect from the Incredibles universe. But again, I think that there would have been cooler stories to tell had they picked it up a little bit later in life. But I guess if they keep making these movies, they'll have an opportunity to do that down the road. So we'll see how Incredibles 2 does, I guess.
So I actually did see that this had been released, and I was like, oh, I got a little bit of time. I'll go ahead and watch it. And then I was like, you know what? I kind of want to just troll Tyler because he gets a little butthurt when I don't watch these trailers. So I was like, nah, I think I'll skip it just so I can say that I didn't watch it.
Well, this wouldn't typically be something that I throw into nerd news because, it is what it is. Like, typically we'll talk about a trailer for a movie once and then let it go. But it's a bad week for nerd news, so I had to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel here. So speaking of scraping the bottom of the barrel, it came out yesterday that after the Bumblebee spinoff movie that comes out this December, that the Transformers universe is going to relaunch and start a new continuity. So yeah, there's that.
I honestly am surprised that they haven't done that already. Like, it felt like because these movies made so much money and they continue to make so much money that it was gonna happen eventually. I'm just surprised that they even bother with the Bumblebee movie. If you're already gonna reboot it, I mean, I guess get one more out of it and it'll probably do decent amount of money, but I don't know how much people are gonna. I don't know how many people still care about these movies, and especially if they know that this is going to be the last one, why you would even bother with it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I've given up on Transformers, don't get me wrong. I think that if push comes to shove, I'll probably watch the Bumblebee spinoff because it takes place in the 80s and it's not directly tied to like the mess that's going on with the movies that they've done recently with Mark Wahlberg. So, I could see myself watching that movie. I could also see myself not watching that movie. I guess we'll see how the podcast plays out and if it's a movie we end up reviewing or not. But as far as like the main Transformers movies go, I mean, you and I gave up on it a while ago. So you'd have to pay me to watch The Last Night. I have no interest in that. So to me, it's a no-brainer that at this point you'd start over if you think that the franchise is valuable, because I would imagine they've seen a decrease in ticket sales as these movies have gone on. So
our definition of saving it and their definition of saving it are two different things, because as far as the movie studio is concerned, these movies are awesome because they make a lot of money. So I don't know if they're necessarily interested in making a good movie. They just want to keep making money, which makes sense, I guess.
I think these movies just take themselves too seriously. Like, they're fucking robots that turn into cars. Like, make it funny, make it cheesy. Like, that's what I would like to see from this franchise. I mean, it's not a franchise that I care that much about anyways. It was a little bit before my time when those cartoons were really popular, but like, I don't want to see some deathly serious movie about robots turning into cars. It's not something that interests me.
Not that it really matters, but it seems like every movie there's this new threat, like this overwhelming threat every single movie. And it's just like, come on, like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, Megatron was the first movie, and then Megatron comes back, and then there's another thing and another thing on top of that. And it's just like, I don't know. It's hard to believe. I can't. I know that's probably easy analysis because it's about a movie about vehicles or like robots turning into vehicles and stuff like that. That it's hard to believe. But yeah, the plot just doesn't make any sense for any of these movies.
No, and I mean, how many cities are there left to destroy? Like, it's just, I don't know what you'd call it, but like action porn or something like that. Speaking of action porn, I didn't have this in their news, but I did want to bring it up to you. I don't know if this trailer was attached to the version of Black Panther you saw, but I finally saw the trailer for that heist movie that takes place during a hurricane. I think it's actually called Hurricane. I could have swore you were the person who told me about this movie.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh my God, dude. Do yourself a favor and look it up. I wish I remember what it was called, but it's basically the creators of Fast and Furious. And I want to say it's called The Hurricane Heist. And it is the worst. Like, I don't think it's a real movie. Like, you talked about that with Skyscraper. This is worse than the Skyscraper trailer. It is called The Hurricane Heist. Thieves attempt a massive heist against the U.S. Treasury as a Category 5 hurricane approaches one of its mint facilities. And it, like, the tagline in the trailer was like theft at 600 miles per hour, and it looks like hot garbage. I'm not.
Would you say that it looks worse than the Geostorm trailer? Because I honestly thought that was a prank.
Yeah, I would. It's worse than the Geostorm trailer. I mean,
That's impressive just on its own.
Dude, it is. I was sitting there with my jaw on the ground watching this trailer. It was terrible. Do yourself a favor and look it up because it is a mess. But anyways, back to nerd news. So let's see. Bruce Banner is coming back to comics. The Incredible Hulk's going to be back in Avengers number 684. If you remember correctly, Bruce Banner was killed by Hawkeye in Civil War II, which Pat did not like. But
nope.
Of course, this is comic book science, so they didn't say how he's going to be brought back to life, but he'll be there in Avengers 684, and they said that you better watch out because he's really mad. So
I can only imagine.
I'm not currently reading the Avengers books, but I mean, obviously Bruce Banner can't stay dead forever, but this is...
No.
I mean, it gets old. Like, kill somebody, bring him back, kill somebody, bring him back. Like, I'm not interested at this point anymore.
It just feels weird to me because they do stuff like this all the time. And at this point, because it happens so often, it feels like they want that shock value. But if you've read any comics ever, you know that they're going to bring them back. So I don't understand what shock value they're going to get by killing off a character like this because you know he's going to come back. So, I mean, at this point, if you've read any kind of comic books in your life, you kind of just roll your eyes because you know eventually it's going to happen. So I just don't understand what they're even doing anymore.
Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, and at this point, there's so many Hulks out there too. Like, I don't know how you mix them because the She-Hulk dropped the she from her name and she's kind of been the Incredible Hulk. Then you have Totally Awesome Hulk. And I forget the guy's name who is that version of the Hulk, but I don't know. Comic books, I guess it's a love-hate relationship. Like, when they're good, they're really fucking good. But when they're bad, it's really bad. So I guess the same could be said for any medium, but comics. It's different.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you didn't go from Transformers to Michael Bay's Lobo movie.
I saw that briefly and it pissed me off so much that I kept going. So no, that is a news story this week is Michael Bay might be directing a Lobo movie, which is fucking insane that anybody would even still hire him to direct something. But
it makes sense that DC would hire him to direct it because they obviously don't care how good their movies are. Yeah,
so we have that to look forward to, I suppose. But
that movie will never get made.
No way, man. That movie's been in development for a while, so I can't imagine that's the next character they want to give a movie to. Like, let's get Batman right and Superman right before you start making fucking Lobo movies. But But anyways, I got one more article here, and I was just kind of curious what your opinion on this was. So I saw it on IGN the other day, and they had this video. It was a long conversation. I didn't watch all of it, but basically the premise was, are loot boxes in video games basically illegal gambling, and should kids be allowed to buy them? And I think that this goes deeper than just an IGN article. I want to say that some courts in some states are looking at this. So
some countries have already deemed it illegal.
Really? So
yep.
I mean, I don't want to sound like an old ratchety guy, but I kind of agree a little bit, like especially the kid portion of it. Like it is kind of gambling. You don't know what you're going to get. Like, I don't think that it's probably as serious as it's being made out to be. But if I had a kid who had an Xbox, I'd be super pissed if he was spending money like that on loot boxes and stuff. And I guess that would be on me as a parent to make sure he didn't have access to funds to do it. But I don't know. They kind of have a point. And maybe it's just because I hate loot boxes so much that I want to see them done away with. But yeah, that's kind of my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the layers of, because there's a couple of different layers to this, and I think you touched on them really well. Yeah, my opinion is pretty much aligned with yours, which shouldn't surprise you. That's why we're friends. But yeah, I hate loot boxes so much. I hate them, especially now that I've gotten into gaming the last couple of years. And it's frustrating when you put a ton of time into a game. Like most recently for me, I really got into Madden Ultimate Team this year. I did a series on the YouTube channel where I kind of was building my team, and it was the first year that I really got into it. So I made a lot of mistakes and I wasted a lot of coins and stuff like that. But I kind of went into it knowing that they don't call it loot boxes, you open packs, but it's the same thing. And I knew going into it that I didn't want to spend any money on it. And so I was just getting coins, unlocking coins, and then buying packs and going to the auction house and buying cards and stuff like that. And I had an overall 88 team. And I played this guy, and he just destroyed me. Like, absolutely destroyed me. And I played Madden for a long time. I've never gotten beat that bad. So there's no way that guy didn't spend a good 60, $100 on that team. And that's frustrating because I spent so many hours building up that team and just not even be competitive against somebody. That's one layer that really pisses me off. But you kind of touched on the kids aspect of it. And I think that's the point that most people are going to make is that video games are generally bought by kids and played by kids. And when you have these things in these games and kids don't understand what it's like to earn real money, most of them don't. And they don't understand the value of money. So they're just going to continue spending it, especially when it's not their money. And I've read stories about kids like being disowned from their families and having minimum wage jobs and basically going into debt to play these games. And I read a story a while back that a kid who had a minimum wage job spent over $19,000 with these loot crates in I can't remember what game it was. And that's just crazy to me. Like, some people just can't handle it. Like, you and we're not, I'd like to think that I don't have a super addictive personality when it comes to stuff like that. Like, gambling just doesn't really affect me that much. So I'm lucky in that sense, but there are people out there that generally just cannot control it. And to put these into these loot crates that affect gameplay is pretty dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely two sides to it. Like you said, there's the argument that it takes the competitive edge out of video games, which is dumb from our standpoint. But then there's like the actually dangerous side of it where, like you said, people with addictive personality. So I think that you said it very well. I think that it's a bummer for sure. So I'm curious to see what happens there. And I don't know, man. It's definitely a side of modern video gaming that I'm pretty bummed about.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when, like, I'm turned off by certain games because I was just like, well, I'm not gonna spend extra money for this game to buy all this shit. And so I'm not going to really be able to compete all that well with certain players because they're willing to buy all of this stuff. So that bums me out. But then, like I said, you kind of have to think about the other side of it, which is people that can't control themselves getting addicted to this game and getting addicted to buying these loot crates and going into debt and all that stuff. And it's kind of sad because it doesn't seem like a lot of developers care about that. And I don't see how you couldn't consider this gambling. It's not conventional gambling because you're not at a casino or whatever, but it's actually, I think, more dangerous because casinos, you have to be of a certain age. You don't have to be a certain age to do this kind of gambling.
Yeah, man, for sure. So that is all I have for nerd news.
All right, so we are back to reviewing movies again. We reviewed Cloverfield Paradox last week, and we're going to be reviewing the next entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Panther, which was directed and written by Ryan Coogler, who did Fruitvale Station, which a movie that I really loved a few years ago. And then, of course, he did Creed, I think it was 3 years ago, which is a movie, one of the best legacy sequels I've ever seen. Really, really just phenomenal movie. This is the 18th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it follows the events of Captain America Civil War. After his father's death, Black Panther returns home to find his right to the throne of Wakanda challenged. And at this point of reviews, we generally talk about our expectations going into a movie, but kind of how I feel about Star Wars when we talk about Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. It's obviously we're going to be excited about it. Obviously we're going to have our expectations pretty high, but this one kind of felt a little bit different because I was kind of hoping that it was going to be a little bit more contained of a story. And we'll get into whether or not that was the case, but that was kind of my expectations going in. Was I wanted a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie that didn't really feel like a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm right there with you. Like, when this movie was announced, I wasn't overly excited, although Black Panther was like, one of the many highlights of Civil War whenever he was introduced in that movie. And as the movie got closer to coming out and, these trailers were released, I got more and more hyped. And obviously I thought that it was going to be pretty great because I took this as the number one pick in our Rotten Tomatoes film draft. And I'm excited to get into this review. I think that we both probably have some things to say here and there, but I mean, overall, I was pretty pleased. So,
yeah, for sure. And before we get started, I think it'd be funny. We kind of talked about this. I don't know if it was the last episode or maybe it was the episode before that, but I think to add to our drinking game, I think everybody should take a shot anytime we mispronounce somebody's name or a character's name in this review, because it's going to be real bad.
Yeah, I was looking at the IMDb page as especially whenever we get to performances. Yeah, it's going to be tough, man. So
yeah, for sure. So the first segment of all of our reviews is just kind of a general overview. We call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Black Panther?
I mean, so I kind of said it in the intro there, like, overall, I really liked it, and I got more and more excited as we got to this movie coming out. Black Panther is a character that was long overdue for a feature film, and, hints had been dropped about the character's existence in the Marvel Cinematic Universe since Iron Man 2 back in 2010. What Ryan Coogler was able to do with this character, and with Wakanda in particular, was pretty amazing. There are a few gripes I have here and there, but overall, I left the film feeling pretty inspired. I thought that this movie balanced a lot of things pretty well that I'll get into as we get into the review. But it's not my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movie of all time, but it's definitely up there. Like it was a pretty fun watch for me.
Yeah, after watching this film, I felt like they read all the critiques of the MCU, the fact that it was heavy-handed with the connecting of the universe in some movies, and they really have a villain problem in the MCU. They just don't develop their villains very well. And kind of what I said in the intro was I was kind of hoping that this was going to be the least Marvel Cinematic Universe-y movie we've seen so far, and I was kind of hoping that it'd be self-contained, and it's exactly that. Like, they basically have very little tying this movie to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I really appreciated that. And I just felt like they wanted to treat the movie almost like Wakanda in the movie was treating the rest of the world. Like it basically wanted to shield itself from the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so I really appreciated that. And the fact that the villain, it might be one of my favorite villains, and that has a lot to do with the performance, which we'll get into later in the review, but might be one of my favorite villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe we've seen so far. And I don't remember who said this, but I was reading an interview, and I may have even posted to our Facebook page, and I'm sure I made some smart-ass remark about like, well, of course he's going to say something like this in an interview because he's in the movie. But basically, one of the actors said that this movie, that he was blown away by this movie, the script for this movie, because it felt like a Game of Thrones episode. And honestly, I kept thinking about that as I was watching this movie, and I was like, it actually kind of does feel like Game of Thrones. Like, it doesn't feel like a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. It feels like a Game of Thrones episode. And obviously, we both love Game of Thrones, so that's a huge plus for us.
Yeah, man. I didn't really make that connection, but I definitely can see it.
For sure. So let's dive right into the story. How'd you feel about Black Panther?
So I liked almost all of the story for the most part, except for a few things. And I'm going to get my negative thoughts out of the way first here and end with all of the positive things I have to say. So there were a few points in the story where it became obvious where things were headed. So that was a bit of a bummer, kind of just knowing how things were going to play out. I also didn't like a couple of the character arcs in the movie, specifically Claw. And I felt like there were a few characters that could have been utilized a little better. But with that being said, and getting like those, couple negative things out of the way first, I want to talk about how much I loved other aspects of the story. So I was really impressed that almost the entire movie and most of the major plot points actually take place in Wakanda. I was worried that it was going to be kind of like a globe hopping adventure, but Wakanda was so beautiful and so well done in this movie. It was exciting that, almost all of it took place there. So I really love that aspect of the story. I also thought that the movie did a great job of showing the struggles of a newly crowned king and the challenge of not being a carbon copy of your predecessor and being your own man, especially when that person that you're preceding is your father. And another aspect of the story, not to jump around too much, but another aspect that I really loved is that like Ryan Coogler balanced the traditional African culture with the advances that Wakanda has due to vibranium very, very well. And I also loved what a huge part vibranium played in the story, because vibranium is such an important thing in the comics, and it's where a lot of heroes get their weapons or their abilities is from vibranium. So it was cool to see it talked about so much in this movie and like finally introduced at such a big level. There were definitely political undertones in this movie, and in this climate, it would have definitely been the elephant in the room had they not been explored. But what Ryan Coogler was able to do with the story by, weaving those undertones in and not making them overbearing was masterful, in my opinion. Moving on to the villain, like you said, Killmonger, I completely agree with you. I don't think that there's been a better fleshed out Marvel villain yet. Like, we've talked in a lot of reviews about the villain problem that these movies have, but I think that this movie benefited from having already introduced Black Panther in Civil War, so there was more time to explain what's driving Killmonger's decision as a villain. And I think I don't think there's any question. I think this is my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe villain so far. I will say, and I know this is a lazy comparison, but there are similarities in this movie to The Lion King. And I that's a lazy comparison because they both take place in Africa, but there are definitely some parallels, with like the fight for the throne and other bits here and there. Like the part where, T'Challa he takes that herb or whatever and, sees his father. That's almost exactly like, seeing Mufasa in the sky. There were a couple things here and there, and I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but I couldn't help but think of Lion King, and that's not a bad thing. And like I said, I just wanted to bring it up, knowing it was a lazy comparison, but I thought it was kind of funny. And I don't know. The last thing before I throw it over to you for story that I do want to touch on and is basically what you said in your broad strokes. So this doesn't feel like a Marvel movie we've ever seen before. It feels completely different. And I think that that's how the superhero genre is going to be able to stay fresh. If we get the same thing over and over just with different characters, I think it might happen like what Steven Spielberg said, and this could go the way of the Western and be a tired genre in a few years. But the thing is, this movie feels completely different from Thor Ragnarok, which felt completely different from Spider-Man Homecoming, which feels completely different from Iron Man. Like it's just these all take place in the same universe, but I appreciate how much they differentiate themselves from one another. So overall, like Black Panther, I thought was pretty great. Like I was very well pleased with it.
Yeah, and just to kind of touch on the point you just made before I move on to my story thoughts, I think that you can continue to make something fresh when you let people, I wouldn't necessarily say some of these directors are up and coming, but kind of do what Star Wars has done, which is give different movies to different directors. You have these producers that are the kind of like the showrunner, I guess, of this universe, but then you give particular movies to particular directors, up and coming directors, or just really visionary directors. And I think that's how you make movies like this feel fresh. So I think they did a really good job, and they picked kind of the perfect person to do a Black Panther movie. Now, as far as the story is concerned, I'm going to start off with the most important part of it, at least for me, which is Andy Serkis's arc. No, that was a joke. I'm gonna start off at the beginning, and I honestly, for most of this movie, was like, why did we see that little bit at the very beginning? And I think honestly, like normally, if the movie was mediocre, I would be like, oh well, that thing that we saw at the beginning is either never gonna come up again, or it's going to play like this huge part in the rest of the movie. But the stuff in the middle was so compelling that I almost like forgot about the beginning. And so it actually kind of took me off guard how it kind of weaves itself back into the story, because I almost completely forgotten about it because I was so interested in the stuff that was happening. If this movie was of lesser quality, I think I would have just continually harped in my brain about what the hell was that thing that we just saw. But because everything was so compelling, I almost forgot about it. And that made the twist towards the end more satisfying because I didn't see it coming. Now, to actually touch on Andy Serkis's Claw, his arc, I understand that from what I understand, people were a little upset about his arc. And honestly, yeah, I was disappointed that he wasn't used more in this movie. He kind of is used almost as a misdirect in this movie. But the movie really isn't about him. It's about Black Panther and it's about Wakanda. And I liked the fact that they made the villain more about Wakanda, because he worked there and he was basically this terrorist and then he fled. So there are ties to the other Black Panthers in the past with Claw, but I do like the fact that they kind of made it more of a Wakanda villain than just Claw. So I do appreciate his time in this movie, but I do like the fact that it was short-lived, because I think that it would have been a mistake if they kept him. Like, I really enjoyed his character in this movie, but I think it would have been a misstep if they made him the main villain. Mostly because I love the way they did the villain in this movie, like we talked about before. But, this movie is so self-contained, like I said, in broad strokes, that it doesn't feel like a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie at all. I mean, of course, you have Martin Freeman's character and you have Claw that is mentioned briefly in other movies. So it does, I mean, you do have those added bits in there to kind of loosely base it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I really just love how it's this Game of Thrones-esque movie where it's more about what's happening in Wakanda and kind of the people wanting to get to the throne and stuff like that. I was more interested in that stuff than I was in the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, and I really loved. And I didn't stick with this run of comics, the most recent run of Black Panther, and I am not going to even try to pronounce the guy's name because I would just butcher it, but he actually was thanked in the credits of this movie, so Ryan Coogler definitely got inspiration from the most recent run of Black Panther, but I really liked, especially the first 5 or 6 issues of that comic, where it kind of touched on the fact that Black Panther is this warrior, he is this superhero, but he also is this king, and he has to make decisions that aren't gonna be popular, and Black Panther definitely makes one of those decisions in this movie that a lot of people around him didn't really appreciate, or at least a small minority didn't appreciate. So I really liked that they brought that thread into this movie.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I gave up on that comic after the first issue, so I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about, but it's cool that they thanked him in the credits and kind of used some of those ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Because I was kind of hoping that would creep up in this movie, and of course it did. So I definitely appreciated that.
Yeah, man.
All right, so let's jump right into the performances.
So, I mean, this is such an amazing cast, man. Almost everyone shines. There's so many cool people in this movie. We kind of knew what we were going to be getting with Chadwick Boseman, what he would be like as T'Challa, because, he was in Civil War and he continued to deliver here, but there were a lot of other actors and actresses in this movie that knocked it out of the park. So, I'll start with Andy Serkis really quick. I thought that he was amazing as Claw. He was really a dastardly villain, and I wish that he did more live action roles. because I think that he has that potential to be a real actor. So,
he was a real actor before.
that was
Tread lightly.
But no, he did a great job there. And then Lupita Nyong'o, she was amazing as always. She's done a lot of really cool things over the years, and I think that she really shined here as a strong female character in this movie. But for me, the biggest surprise, and this is where I'm going to start butchering names, but was how much I loved. Oh God, Danny Gurira.
Not even close.
Not even close. Basically, the actress that plays Michonne on The Walking Dead. I loved her performance in this movie. I've only seen her as Michonne, and you and I are both on record as pretty much having given up on The Walking Dead and not really liking it anymore. But I thought she killed it here. She was such a great character in this movie, and I think that you kind of alluded to how much you enjoyed Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. And I will say here, again, Killmonger is my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe villain because he has the best backstory in my opinion. But I wasn't 100% bought into Michael B. Jordan's performance. I thought there were a few scenes here and there that he didn't really show much of an emotional range. And, I'm seriously just nitpicking here. I think that he did a fine job and he's a good actor. I still think Killmonger is the best. I just think there were a couple scenes here and there where he was outshined by Chadwick Boseman a little bit, to be honest. But yeah, man, I don't really have any huge complaints. I thought that the cast that was assembled for this movie was incredible.
Yeah, they did a really good job, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying, about picking the perfect director. I think they kind of picked the perfect cast for this movie. I loved Andy Serkis as Claw. I thought he was outstanding. I know a lot of people have somewhat compared him. I've heard the comparison of him kind of being Heath Ledger's Joker, that same type of character. Now, obviously,
nobody's fucking said that.
I've read that, dude. I'm not saying I agree with it. Obviously, I'm not going to go that far. I've literally said that on the podcast that that's the single greatest performance I've ever seen. I'm not going to touch on it. They're not saying that it was as good as that performance. They're saying that it's a similar type of villain, and I would definitely agree with that. And I think he does a great job in the limited use in this movie. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting to point out. Apparently, Tyler doesn't agree with me.
No, I thought you meant performance-wise. I'm like,
no, and it's not my opinion. I'm just saying I've read articles that have talked about that, and I've actually seen an interview where he discusses that that didn't actually influence him because apparently a lot of people are seeing the similarities between his character and the Joker in The Dark Knight. Now, I'm not saying that he comes even close to that as much as I love Andy Serkis, but I could see the similarities in the character. But yeah, I thought that he was amazing. I pretty much agree with everything that you said except for maybe the Michael B. Jordan stuff. I think that how do I put this? I think that when two actors go together, I don't know necessarily if I think that Michael B. Jordan was bad in certain scenes because what's his name? You just literally said his name. God damn it. Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah.
I think he has Black Panther just nailed down. And so when I think two actors go against each other and one is just absolutely has the character, just does it by second nature, I think some of the times that can outshine the other person, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the other person's doing bad. And so I think that might have been a case in this movie. I will say that, and I'm not even going to try to butcher his name, but the guy from Get Out, I will say that I was a little bit disappointed in his performance. I didn't think that he did a very good job. I didn't believe the emotion. Because there's a moment in this movie where he kind of has to make a choice, and he makes it, and he kind of aligns himself with, I guess, the wrong person. And you don't really feel the emotion behind that choice and the emotion behind that conflict. I just don't think that his character was very well developed and just very well executed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And the only reason I didn't bring him up was because I didn't know how to pronounce his name. So, but yeah, I agree. I agree. He was kind of one note here, which was disappointing because he was so great in Get Out.
For sure. So unless you have anything else about the performances, we'll go ahead and move on to the action.
Yeah. So I thought the action was very, very well done. I liked that it was a lot of hand-to-hand combat. Especially like the climax of the movie. Not really a huge spoiler, but a little bit, I guess, if you don't want to know about anything in the movie going into it. It's pretty much just a hand-to-hand combat between Killmonger and Black Panther, which I really appreciated because, we've talked about how these superhero movies, it turns into kind of like a destruction porn type thing, and that's not really part of this film, which, again, was kind of a breath of fresh air. I will say, at a certain point in the movie, rhinos become a part of the action, and that's where it kind of lost me a little bit. I was not a fan of that. I thought that was a strange inclusion, and I'll be honest, like I don't know a lot about Black Panther from the comics, and I don't know if that's like a thing in the comics is there are these rhinos on Wakanda that are trained for battle or whatever, but that definitely lost me a little bit. But besides that, like I thought it was pretty awesome. Like there's a car chase in South Korea that takes place that was pretty fantastic. Where they're chasing Claw. I like that quite a bit. And I thought that, almost all of the action scenes were shot really well.
Yeah, the car chase is pretty amazing. And I was already into this movie before we saw the car chase, but I was like, oh man, I'm absolutely loving this movie right now. I think some of there's an earlier scene where there's kind of like a heist, and I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, the last 20 minutes action wise were pretty lackluster for me, especially the rhinos. I thought that was so fucking stupid. Like it felt like the most superhero Marvel Cinematic Universe thing for them to do in this movie, and it fell flat for me because, like I said, I really wanted it to not be that type of movie, and it really was for 75% of the movie, and then they brought in the rhinos, and I was like, oh, come on, man. I will say that I did really appreciate, and maybe this is not necessarily what they were going for, but it was kind of how I interpreted it. I really appreciate the fact that early in the movie, they're talking about his new suit, and he basically makes a mention that he didn't want the gold on his suit because he wants to be stealthy and stuff like that. And I thought that was a really good point that he made. And fast forward to the fight that you just mentioned at the end, I thought it was kind of cool that Killmonger picked the suit that was kind of flashy, and I thought that went really well with his character. I know that doesn't really have anything to do with the action, but I just thought it was a point that I wanted to make, and I forgot to do earlier. I just thought that even little tiny details like that, I thought were really well done in this movie, because maybe that's not what they were going for, but that's kind of how I interpreted it, that his character was kind of more of a flashier character than Black Panther.
Yeah, man. No, I completely agree.
All right, so that was actually kind of a quick review. We didn't really disagree with each other too much on this particular movie. We both thought it was fantastic. So star rating out of 5 stars, would you give it?
I would give it a 4 out of 5. And just to plug my Letterboxd real quick, at that Tyler Hunt, if you go to my Letterboxd, I have a running list of the Marvel Cinematic Universe ranked. So I've given a few of the Marvel movies a 4 out of 5, but if you would like to see where I rank it in the grand scheme of things, you can follow me at that Tyler Hunt. Shameless plug.
Yeah, I actually recently updated our website, thenerdspodcast.com, and I actually added a tab where you can actually click on each of ours letterbox feeds. I'm at the Nerds Podcast because I'm shameless trying to get our name out there as much as possible. So I'm at the Nerds Podcast, and of course Tyler's at that Tyler Hunt. So if you want to check that out, just click on our letterbox tab on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. All right, so I am going to give it 4 out of 5 as well. I was kind of going back and forth between 4 and 4.5, but the last 20 minutes, like I said, with the rhinos really kind of left, I don't want to say a sour taste in my mouth because I don't want to go that negative, but it did kind of bother me a little bit. And there's a couple of things here and there, but for the most part, it probably doesn't overtake Guardians and maybe Captain America Civil War, but it's definitely up there. It's for sure top 5 favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movies for me.
Yeah, you kind of threw me a curveball. Like we streamed the other night playing Fortnite, and before we started the stream, we were kind of talking about Black Panther, and I hadn't seen it yet, and you kind of alluded to not really liking it, and then we were talking before we started recording this morning, and again, you kind of alluded to having some problems with it, and then you went for the 4 out of 5. So I will give you credit there for your curveball.
No, it's just I think that had a lot to do with the fact that the last 20 minutes were what's disappointing, and that's the last thing that you see. And so it was kind of what was on my mind at the time. But the more that we talked about it and the more that we kind of praised it, it was like, oh, well, that's just a small chunk of this movie, when in the whole scope of it, I mean, it's an over 2 hour long movie that I really loved. Now, do you want to go into the stingers? I know we don't normally do that, but would you want to talk about the stingers?
Sure.
Because I have a serious problem with especially the second one.
Okay, let's talk about the first one.
Okay.
Are we going to spoil or no?
Well, I'll just go ahead and I'm editing this week, so I'll just go ahead and add an extra little timestamp on there, so you guys can skip ahead to Nerd Favor if you don't want to listen to this if you haven't seen it yet.
Okay, cool. So let's start with the first one then. All right, I guess I can.
Oh, I thought you were just going to go.
No, I'll go. So I thought that the first one, like, honestly, the first one doesn't carry a ton of weight. It's just kind of a nice little stinger to the movie and how Wakanda is going to help the rest of the world. And, you know, it's kind of funny because they're like everybody thinks of Wakanda as a third world country. And it's like, how are you going to help us? And of course, unbeknownst to them, they have all of this technology and the vibranium. I did like how it was kind of a callback to Iron Man a little bit. Yeah, they're basically like, "Who are you?" And I don't know. It was a cute little callback to what started all of this. So I did like that. So I thought the first stinger, again, not a lot happens there, but it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the first one for a lot of the things that you said, and I thought it was a very cool way to bring it back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I thought that was kind of I would say like a compromise between the movie that we saw and trying to bring it into this overall universe, to kind of use it as a stinger. And so I really appreciated the first one. The second one is the one that I had the most problems with, and it is literally the worst stinger I think I've ever seen for one of these movies. It was just so useless. There was nothing happens in it. Basically, if you haven't seen this, well, I guess you shouldn't be listening to this if you haven't seen this movie, but you just literally see the Winter Soldier wake up without his arm and walk around, and they just basically chit-chat for 10 seconds, and then it's over. It carries zero weight. And, I think it was just an excuse to remind people that he's there. We know he's there. Like, they make a joke about it earlier in the movie, and I really appreciated that joke. There's not a ton of humor in this, and we didn't really touch on that in the review, but I think the humor that is in this really, really hits, especially the SoundCloud link. I thought that joke was really, really funny. But yeah, I think that they do that really well in this movie. So we knew he was there. They kind of, in a way, reminded us then. So I don't think that we needed this in this movie, and I just think it was a complete waste of time. Like, I watched the rest of the credits to see the second stinger for no fucking reason whatsoever.
So let me tell you why I don't like this stinger, and it's a completely opposite reason that you just said. So whenever this stinger was going on, and, it starts with like the kids kind of messing with somebody, and you see it from their point of view, so you don't know who the person is, and it's like, okay, well, obviously this is the Winter Soldier. Whenever he comes out of the tent and you see him for the first time, my sweet, sweet wife audibly goes, "Yes, please," because I guess she finds Sebastian Stan attractive, which I didn't know. And so that kind of put the damper on the rest of my day. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You said that in the theater full of people. Like, what am I, chopped liver? So
you should just grow your hair out.
I know.
It's got to be the hair, right?
Yeah, I kept getting her shit about that, but that kind of put a sour taste in my mouth about that. So yeah, that's kind of my thought on it. Like, as a stinger, doesn't really set up Infinity War at all, which nothing about this movie set up Infinity War. So I appreciate that it was kind of self-contained.
Yeah, I just hated it so much. Like I was so pissed, and that may have also contributed to my reaction when we were streaming the other night.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so there's our review of Black Panther, and as always, we're going to end this episode with a nerd favorite. I'm going to change it up a little bit. I was kind of struggling to find a topic this week, and I went on to Ranker because we found some really cool lists on them recently when we kind of had that dead period of reviewing movies, and we had to find something to talk about, and we found some really good lists on there. And when I say we, I mean Tyler found some really good lists. I went on there and I found some really shitty lists. Like I've never really been on that website before, and there's some really fucking stupid shit on that website. But I was able to find a list that I thought was pretty interesting, and it basically was kind of like the worst. I don't remember exactly how they phrased it, but kind of like the worst turns in like horror franchises. And kind of the way that I interpret it is kind of like when they jump the shark, so to speak. And so I'm going to kind of talk about the one that really bugged me the most. So I guess our least favorite, kind of tying it back to the segment that we always do, kind of our least favorite turn in a horror franchise. And for me, mine actually did make the list. I think it was number 10. And it's so frustrating because the Descent is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's definitely a horror staple or Shocktober staple for me. I usually watch it every single year during that time. It is just a fantastic movie for many reasons, but the fact that it does something that many movies have tried to do and don't really stick the landing very well. It's like they build these characters, and it's a movie that works well as kind of like this survival movie. We talked about this before. Like, we don't like when movies kind of make Mother Nature the villain, and this movie kind of does that a little bit, but they're not mad at it. They're kind of mad at each other and just kind of trying to survive. And so that's a movie in itself, and it does a really good job of creating that kind of survival movie. And then it makes this turn about 75% of the way through the movie that is really terrifying, and it kind of takes it to this horror aspect. And it's just, that is so well done that I absolutely love that movie. It's almost like watching kind of two different movies that are kind of blended together really well. And I just love that movie so much. And I was completely taken back when I first saw it, how much I liked it. And I continue to like it to this day. I've seen it probably at least 8 or 9 times since I saw it a few years ago for the first time. Unfortunately, Descent number 2 is just absolute garbage. It's just a quick cash grab. It's really just a sequel for sequel's sake. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They basically give her amnesia to bring her back to the cave, which there's no fucking way you would ever get me back there. And it's just a stupid movie. And it really kind of taints the first movie for me a little bit. And I don't even think I've seen all of it because it was so bad. I know that we watched it a couple of Shocktobers ago, and we watched it at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I don't think either one of us stayed awake the whole time because it's so fucking boring, and it really puts a bad taste in your mouth with the whole franchise.
Yeah, I had completely forgotten I'd even seen that movie.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what happens in that film because it was so bad and boring. I don't know. For me, so a film that jumps the shark, I don't know, this was tough to think of on short notice, but as far as like cheesy, dumb twists on horror movies go that don't really fit in, like anytime that I hear that, like my mind goes to one movie, and that movie is Jason X.
Okay.
So I'll be honest, I have never seen this movie, but you best believe that I know what it's about because it's so fucking far out there. So basically, it's Jason in the future on a spaceship. If you look at IMDb, the description of what the plot in this movie is, Jason Voorhees returns with a new look, a new machete, and his same murderous attitude as he is awakened on a spaceship in the 25th century. So just garbage. Just like the fact that this movie exists and that it took itself seriously blows my mind. I don't know. It's crazy that this thing exists, and I may have actually seen this when it came out when I was a kid, and I just don't remember it. But just a shitty movie. Like, that shows you how tired the Friday the 13th franchise was. Like, they got to a point where they're like, well, let's just fucking put them in space. And that's where they went with it. And I think the one after this was Freddy versus Jason, which, believe it or not, actually makes more sense than this movie does. So I think this could possibly be one of the most ridiculous horror movies ever made.
Yeah, for sure. And we kind of talked a little bit about this a while back, but like eventually they keep making more and more horror movies in a franchise. Eventually you're going to get one that's just really, really stupid. And honestly, I don't really like the Friday the 13th movies that much anyways.
Yeah.
So it's not much of a stretch for me for them to eventually get stupid. And I think Jason Goes to Hell is pretty stupid. And then, of course, Jason X is even more stupid, if you can imagine that.
Yeah, man. No, I totally agree.
All right, so that is it for episode 177 of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. As always, you can subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio. Basically, any good podcatcher you use, we're probably on it. Check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, where you can check out our letterbox feeds, like we said earlier. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tyler and I will be streaming together a little bit more often. Hopefully it goes a little bit better than Friday did, but we're working on it. It's still a work in progress for sure. You can check out our Twitch channel, which I hope to be streaming on again shortly. I'm probably going to be doing streaming on YouTube and Twitch at the same time. Hopefully, if I can get that to work eventually. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking@gmail.com. And of course, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
We are the Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Wakanda forever.
You're real dumb. Like, you're a dumb person.